Hello, and welcome to a new episode of Leadership Trail Mix. Heraclitus said, "There is nothing permanent except change." Jack Welch said, "Change before you have to." Maya Angelou said, "If you can change it, change your attitude." Yes, change is the topic of today's episode. It's a topic that I'm fascinated about, especially because so much of my work in HR over the last almost 2 decades, gosh, I'm getting old, is about helping people navigate change, big and small, deep and shallow, wide and narrow. This aspect of my job as a psychologist that chose and was chosen by HR made me want to understand what happens to our brains when things change and how we can avoid the 3 Fs: freeze, fight, or fly, understand what is needed for us, acknowledge the change impacts, and move on. To do these things, we need to first understand change, and this is what this episode is all about. But before we continue, just so we can look at it in a very personal way, can you think of a moment when you went through a major change in life? Maybe you're going through it right now, actually, but think about a moment in your life when things changed in a drastic way. Maybe close your eyes, unless you're driving, of course, and try to see yourself in that situation. You may not know it, but the feelings you felt or are feeling going through change were or are related to your scarf. Wait, my what? Yes, your scarf. David Rock is a neuroscientist that came up with this acronym. And here I have to stop and say, North Americans love acronyms, huh? OMG. Anyway, David Rock created the scarf model when studying the impact of change in our brains. In fact, our brains are designed to see things in a very binary way. Is it a threat or is it a reward? No surprise, and because of how we evolved as human beings, change is processed by our brains as a threat. Change, even for the better, can make us feel like our life is in danger. And here's how David Rock articulates why. We feel in danger because our status, our relative importance to others is being impacted. Or maybe certainty is being impacted and we feel unable to predict the future. Maybe it's our autonomy, our sense of control over events. Or our sense of relatedness, how safe we feel with others. And lastly, fairness, how fair we perceive the exchange between people to be. When I asked you to think about a moment of change, the one that came to mind for me was when I decided to move to London at the age of 21 to study English. I had never left my country, I couldn't speak English well, I was going there by myself, leaving my family, my friends behind. When I look back at my experience, I'd probably say that with the exception of fairness, all the other elements of my scarf were being touched on. I was going to a place as a foreigner, knowing mostly nobody. I had no idea of what the future held for me. I felt like I had no control over what was happening or going to happen to me. I was among people that were so different from me. I didn't identify or relate to them. Don't get me wrong, I was excited, and I knew the experience was going to change my life forever, as it certainly did. But it was scary because so much was changing. It was like there was no solid ground under my feet. How about you? Thinking back on the situation I asked you to recall a few minutes ago, can you identify what elements of your scarf were or are being touched? Were or are they all being touched at the same extent, or there is one that was or is being more impacted than others? At this point, I wish I could say that change will stop, but you would know I'm lying, right? If you recall the past experience, you can probably think about other changes that either on a small or larger scale touched your scarf. And if you're going through a moment of drastic change right now, you know this is not the last change in your life. Things change all the time. And while we cannot always be grateful for the change in life, sometimes because there seems to not be really anything to be grateful for, I think we can all acknowledge that the change we've been through brought us here, and we survived. Maybe we didn't feel like we would, or maybe we don't feel like we will because of where we were or are on the change journey. Maybe all we can feel right now is anxiety, fear, sadness. And then To make things easier for us leaders, we have to do it for us while also helping our teams, which are probably having different elements of their scarf being touched on, since they are different people. Well, here the depressurized airplane cabin principle also applies. Put your oxygen mask first before helping others. Yes, easier said than done, and here progress over perfection and doing the best we can with the resources we have at the moment should be our North Star. Things are getting exponentially faster, and so is the speed of change. I think it will take decades for us to understand the impact of COVID-19 in society. But have you noticed that people are getting less kind, more impatient, more aggressive? We are always in a hurry. We don't have the time or the necessary attention to actually listen to each other. I can't help but think that it is related to the speed of change and our scarf being pulled in different directions all the time. It's definitely more than we can handle. What should we do then? The answer comes from Brené Brown, and not from one of her books, but from a tattoo she has in her wrist. Let me describe it for you. It's the letter S, followed by parentheses, and then the letter R. So S, open parentheses, close parentheses, R. The meaning? Between stimulus, S, and response, R, there has to be a space. There has to be a pause for us to make sense of what is going on and then respond instead of react. We seem to operate under the belief that we don't have the right to pause. So the world is changing. All we want to do is get out of it, but we feel obligated to react fast, and our reaction is contaminated with freeze, fight, or flight emotions, and the impact is more destructive than constructive. The reality is, we can pause. More than that, we should pause for as long as we need to, especially when the world is changing around us. And here I have to make a connection to episode 7 where we talked about emotional intelligence. Being self-aware to recognize feelings and sensations in ourselves is key when navigating change. And my hope is that combining it with this SCARF model can help you pinpoint how exactly the changes you are going through or inevitably will go through impact you. As for our teams, using Brené Brown's words, we as leaders need to be space makers, allowing the time and space our teams need to act, instead of reinforcing the belief that stopping and reflecting before acting is not allowed. That's not limited to managing change, but especially true in times of change. And here we will go back to the SCARF model to talk about actions we can take to help people navigate change when the different elements of their scarf are impacted. For status, how can you make your team feel valued? For certainty, what can they know? Can you tell them that you don't know things yet, but that you will share what you can when you do? For autonomy, is there an opportunity to provide your teams with choices, if not related to the change itself, in other areas and potentially at a larger scale, to maybe balance the universe? For relatedness, how can you foster belonging? And for fairness, are you being consistent in the way you treat your team members? Or they feel like you have favorites, people who know about things before everyone else, for example? I know this is quite a lot to take in, so you may need to listen to this episode a couple of times or come back when change knocks on your door. For now, can we focus on being space makers? Our call to action comes in 2 parts. Can you set a reminder for yourself to create space for yourself and others to act instead of react? It can be a post-it note on your monitor like the one I have in front of me right now. Or you can go fancier and get a ring, a bracelet. Just find something to physically remind you that it's okay to stop, breathe, understand how whatever is happening is impacting you, and intentionally react. By consistently doing it for yourself in times of change, your brain should eventually be trained, and over time you should be able to catch the people you lead reacting, and will be able to be a space maker for them. The second part of our call to action is especially for those going through a season of change right now. Can you give yourself some grace, pause today, and acknowledge the parts of your scarf being impacted. And once you do that, can you think about the scarf of your team as a group and for each individual team member? You don't need to schedule a training to share knowledge. If you Google scarf model, you're going to find, in addition to a bunch of models of actual scarves, many resources related to change. Well, you can always share this episode too. Wink, wink. That's all for today, friends. Thank you so much for listening. Take care and talk soon.